Welcome to Inside the Castle, the podcast that goes behind castle doors to have real conversations with real people about solving the nation's toughest challenges. I'm one of your hosts today, Angela Fryermuth.
And I'm Lauren Like. Today we have three guests helping us celebrate Women's History Month, COVID edition. With us today are Ms. Cheree Peterson, Programs Director for the South Pacific Division, Ms. Marcia DeVille, Chief of the Real Estate Programs Branch at USACE Headquarters, and Ms. Maria Lantz, Social Scientist at the USACE Institute for Water Resources. Thank you all for joining us here today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Thank you all. For today's episode, we are focusing on the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on women in the workforce, particularly mothers. As Angie and I are both mothers as well, this is a topic of particular interest to us, and we know a lot of information has come out recently on the disproportionate impact the pandemic has had on women in the workplace, including the statistic that nearly 3 million women have left the workforce in the past year. But before we dive into the questions and the heavy stuff, we always like to start our episode off by getting to know our guests. So we would like first to know more about you all and your families. What do you do and how many children do you have and what ages are your kiddos? So Cheree, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Lauren. Cheree Peterson. I am the Programs Director for the South Pacific Division, which means I'm the Senior Executive in charge of our three of our major programs, which is the VA Medical Construction Program, about $3 billion, our Civil Works Program, which is also about $3 billion right now, and our Military Construction Program, which is about $1 billion. So it's been a great increase in the last year. I'm really proud to help lead the South Pacific Division in this. My kids are both boys. They are 17 and 13, so I am far from changing poopy diapers, but I get treated poopy by my teenagers all the time.
Oh, we know about that. Bless you for having two boys, too. Maria, do you want to go next?
Sure. So Maria Lantz, I'm a collaboration specialist at the Collaboration and Public Participation Center of Expertise, which is at the Institute for Water Resources, and I'm located at the Alexandria, Virginia location. So it's basically my job to improve the collaborative capacity of the agency. That's what our Center of Expertise was established to do, and so we focus on that both internally and externally. And I have two boys also. My boys are 5 years old and 5 months old. So I am well acquainted and currently experiencing the joy of the poopy diapers.
Great. Thank you, Maria. And Marcia?
Okay. Hi, ladies. Marcia DeVille. I'm located at headquarters, and I'm the chief of the Real Estate Programs Branch here. We handle all things real estate systems because we are the real estate agent, for the Army. So we have a huge responsibility. I have 3 daughters, 14, 7, and 5. I am homeschooling in a COVID atmosphere, and it's been interesting. My youngest is in French school, so that's been a challenge in itself. And it's great to meet you all.
Thank you for sharing a bit about your family, and I think Lauren and I can definitely relate on so many levels. Myself, I have 2 kids, a 5-year-old boy, or going to be 5 years, and then a almost 10-year-old daughter. So I understand the aspects of having a boy, and 2 would be quite the chore. And like all of you, I know life changed dramatically when the pandemic started, and so I'd like to just get to know more about how your life has changed, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Sure. So, I think, of course, it's been more difficult. I think everyone would probably say that. Juggling work and childcare at home is insane. And I think we're all just trying to get through that and make it work in our own ways. But I would add that there have been some silver linings. I've really been grateful for more family time. Having a newborn has given us the opportunity as a family with our son just to spend a lot more time together than we would have otherwise, which I really appreciate. And I've also, frankly, really appreciated not having the commute. That's really helped so much with our logistics as a family. So I did want to highlight, there are some good things about this situation, as ridiculous as it can be, of course.
The 13 and a 17-year-old, it's the family time, I say, takes a different different definition. And that, I think, in some ways has made, I don't think anybody's had a harder pandemic than experienced anybody else. It's hard for everybody. But, think back to when you were 13 and 17, and the last people on earth you wanted to spend all your time with was your parents. And that is exactly where we are at. So I have, they're good kids, but they don't want to hang out with us. They sass us all the time. And it's been a struggle. When my son's a junior in high school, it's a big year for him. He's having to do physics and pre-calculus and AP Italian online, which I can't fathom. And then he can't hang out with his friends to let off steam. So it's been really hard. We've had, I would say, some very unfortunate conversations that I've made sure the neighbors couldn't hear by asking afterwards because they were loud and not great. But, we're surviving. We've tried. The one thing that has worked for our family that we enjoy doing together is we call them taste testings. So we've taste tested Oreos and Doritos and Pocky and iced tea and lemonade and anything to sort of what's something we can do fun as a family. I know some people can do bike rides. Some people can play games. Our kids are super competitive, and playing games with two boys ends up in a fist fight, so that's not really an option for us. So it's been hard. I don't know if there's a great silver lining. I can't wait for it to be over. It's been a challenge. I'm grateful that we have a place to stay. We both have great jobs. There's certainly plenty to be thankful for, but it's been hard, and I don't want to give it, in at least the experience that we've had, give it any sort of, I don't want to say rah-rah that it's been great, because it's been rough. It's been rough all the way around. And, I think sometimes people look at leaders and like, oh, I don't know if they must have it all together, but their experience must be better. But, my experience hasn't been better. It's been just as rough as everybody else's.
I agree. This is Marcia. Like I said, that I have 3 daughters. 2 are pretty much only 18 months apart, and then my oldest is 14. She'll be 15 this summer. So it's that dynamic of my 2 youngest, they can occupy themselves and play together, but my oldest feels kind of ostracized because she can't be around her friends. So it's been just a challenge, and she's in a program where when she graduates from high school, she'll also graduate with her associate's degree. And so her curriculum is very strenuous, and she gets stressed out. And I'm trying to, just stay sane with my workload, as well as, with trying to tend to all of their emotions, because they're used to being around their peers. They're used to being social. So that's been like a challenge. So we get along great, but still it's only so much of just being together that I think kids can take. They need to be around their friends just to have that social outing. So it's been a challenge. And I have a kindergartner, so her first experience in school is in front of an iPad, and that's difficult because she can't, navigate on her own. So that means that I'm working a lot of strange hours in the middle of the night to make sure that I stay on top of my job, but also make sure that the girls are, achieving what they need to achieve academically.
Yes, those are huge challenges. I think, although, as Cheree, you pointed out, the pandemic has been hard at all different ages, I do feel like those school-age kids are definitely suffering more, as Angie mentioned at the beginning of this, that we both do have kids at home, and I have a almost 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, which presents their own challenges, but we have been thankful that we've been able to still have daycare for them, which is very different than you all and other friends too. So it's definitely been a struggle at every age for sure, but I do think the challenges with school-age kids are really acute here. And Marcia, you sort of led us into this conversation. So talking about the balance of personal and professional lives, you all just in response to that previous question hit on, the challenges with your kids, but obviously balancing your personal and professional workload is hard regardless of a life-altering pandemic. And so wanted to talk about the difficulty that you all have had balancing the workload with these additional obligations.
So it was certainly a challenge before, but it was a different challenge. It was very tightly time managed to get everybody wherever they needed to be. And so the change has been we have a lot more time, but we don't have a lot more time to do, I think, the fun things that we want to do. You know, like both boys are very sporty. My son's on the high school baseball team. My younger son plays ultimate and soccer. And so it was a different kind of balance in having time. And I would volunteer a lot. I was broom mom, I was team mom for every single sport you can think of. You know, all that disappeared overnight, which was a little bit of a relief because that's a lot of volunteer hours that I was putting in, but happily so. But now the balance, really what I struggle with has been work, has been taking over all that extra time. You know, start around 8 or 8:30. Today, surprise meeting at 7:30 that I found out at 7:15, it was a good meeting and I'm glad I was in it. But then I could work up to 6 or 7 o'clock at night, having to work on the weekends to keep up because the workload just seems to have grown and the demands, it's easier to get a hold of me. I know that's a big thing in the McKinsey report, that it's easy to get a hold of anybody because they're all home. You know, I'm not going to be out at volunteering somewhere, unlikely, not watching my kids play sports. I'm home. So that balance has been trickier for sure. It was once explained to me when I had my second child, I'm like, how am I going to balance all of this? And a more experienced mom at the time, she had 3 kids. She said, there is no balance. I wish you a happy imbalance. And I think that's really the best we can do, certainly during this circumstance, but at all times too. It's never easy, and it's always evolving and different.
When we were, and I'm using quote fingers, you all can't see me, but when we were in the, sense of normalcy, I put in a lot of hours because I handled Europe and Korea and, the Pacific. So I would always put in extra hours anyway, but now it's like trying to just play catch up. So once I get the girls to bed and they, go off to sleep, then it's like, okay, I have to go full mode into work. I come in on the weekends just to, print things and sign things and scan, and COVID has been rough. I was regimented. I always complained about the commute coming into D.C. every day, but now it's like I almost wish I could come into D.C. every day because just trying to do it all at home is stressful.
Yeah, and I would just, these comments completely resonate with me, and I would just add there's this emotional toll that is now present that wasn't there before, and just the emotional capacity to, since my kids are younger, I don't know, maybe it's a little different, but just to deal with them while I'm working is so exhausting. And I remember this story from, I think it was over the summer, and the Collaboration and Public Participation Center had a 5-year strategic planning effort, and I was in the middle of trying to finalize the plan. I'm doing these final edits up against the deadline, and my son he was acting out so much, and I literally didn't have the emotional bandwidth to discipline him yet again, to lock him. I mean, literally, I was locking him out of my office over the summer so that I could do work, which was just awful. And I remember just standing there, like I put the computer up high somewhere on a shelf, and he threw balls at me while I made these edits, and I just accepted it because I literally couldn't do anything else at that point. There was no emotional capacity left for me to work with him effectively. And I think that the child care part of this is you're literally, it's impossible for me at least to do it correctly in a kind and caring way when you're confronted with these deadlines and you're in your house. So that part has just, I think, been the worst.
Oh, Maria, I totally relate to you on that level because my son has done similar things In fact, he once told my husband that the only way you're going to get mom to respond to your question is if you call her on the phone, because she's on the phone all the time. Oh, and so that was like a dagger to the heart on that one. I hear you. As we, think about women in the workplace, and Cheree mentioned the McKinsey report, that report said, that they're seeing that women are leaving the workforce or cutting back their hours at higher rates than men during the pandemic. And so, Marcia, what are you finding that are additional pressures that have fallen to you during this time?
Thank you. Good question. Okay, so I'm the chief of the real estate programs branch, but our chief of real estate or director of real estate, Ms. Brenda Johnson-Turner, was an SES, and she abruptly left. She took another position with HUD, and she had 2 boys also, so she was struggling with that work-life balance as well, as we all. And so when she left, she redelegated her authority to me. So on top of that, I'm doing my work, plus still picking up, and holding the reins for the real estate community. And so that's a challenge in itself. And then with being at home all the time, it's just stressful. I find that, like, my girls and I will just go for a walk just to get outside, to get some fresh air, because when you're confined in your house all the time, even though you may love your home, just being home all the time because you're worried about your health and safety is difficult. And with picking up even more challenges with work, so it's like I'm still doing my workload plus taking on someone else's workload. It's been a challenge. And then trying to keep it all together and motivated. You don't want your kids to see you, like, stressed out. So I'm always, happy-go-lucky, but it's difficult. It really is. I don't think that men in the workforce may experience the same things. Like, I've been on conference calls and, my kids may be in the background, and I've got, like, scoffed. Why is that noise? It's like they're kids. I'm on the conference call. I'm participating. I'm doing what I need to do. They're kids.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that, Marcia, that you get that kind of response. I feel very strongly, because I'm a woman leader, that I want people to see that for me, that and I'm an SES, and I know that, so give me the kind of response that they give you. So I make sure that, I'm stuck in the kitchen because we got 4 people at home, and trust me, when we remodeled our home, it did not include 4 office areas 4 years ago when we did that. So my kids are walking by, my dog's barking, and a couple times I think people have started to say something like, this is life. This is life, and if you don't like it, you're not living in reality right now. I know that's hard for some people to take, but Marcia, I'm really disappointed that you're facing that. That's just not right. Send them to me next time.
Will do.
And I think that's such a great approach. It's really important to see women in leadership. And then it would be even more helpful if, there was a man in leadership who was on the webinar with his baby on his lap. That would send a very strong signal as well. And I know over the summer when I started different work efforts with so many webinars, when I saw my colleagues with their babies on their lap, men or women, it made me feel so much better. It made me feel that, we're in this together, that other people are struggling through this. Their babies are on their lap too. Their 5-year-olds, pushing the computer screen away. And it just made it all okay for me. So I would echo what Cheree said. It's really not fair, Marcia, that people have responded that way. And I would say the opposite response makes us all a little more comfortable in this environment. And that's more of what I've experienced, and it's really helped.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, Maria, following up, you mentioned this earlier, but you and I both had the unique experience of having babies during this pandemic. And that has brought additional pressures at home for you, as well as I know that you also had care for parents at some time throughout this as well. And so you talked a little bit about this normalizing of life right now here with colleagues. And how has that helped you deal with the pressures? Have there also been other things that have helped you deal with the pressures of having a newborn, as well as the other work and life pressures you've had to face? And do you have advice for others who are dealing with similar situations?
It was, of course, really difficult to have a baby during the pandemic, and it was extraordinarily stressful for obvious reasons. One benefit, of course, is that no one is seeing anyone else, and the overall sort of health environment, as long as you don't get COVID, is safer than normal, which helped. But coming back from maternity leave, I think, has actually been really difficult, and much more difficult than last time, coming back from leave into this environment that we are in. There's something about the transition of being home for 4 months, which, I took advantage of that new parental leave program, which I can talk about as well. But I've come back after being home for 4 months to still being home, yet now having to work. And that has made it way more difficult than last time. Going into the office would have provided that separation I needed, that motivation of being surrounded by colleagues again. And instead, I'm surrounded by dirty dishes and laundry. And honestly, it's been a real struggle to come back at this time. So it's just something I'm working through. I welcome advice from others, frankly, on how best to do this. I don't know how many core moms and dads have had babies during the pandemic, but I think that it's been difficult. I guess, maybe one thing I can add to that is we decided to get our kids out of the house. So coming back from maternity leave, you mentioned the McKinsey report and women leaving the workforce. It was basically, the decision was either I was going to come back half-time or the baby was going to leave the house, because there was no way I was going to survive what happened over the summer. And because I have younger children, we have that flexibility. And, listening to Marcia and Cheree with older children, I think it's in a way, when you have preschool age kids, we did extensive research on the health threats out there. We looked at a lot of what's going on in schools right now, who are in session, and the threats associated to kids under 5. And we did so much research, and it was so stressful. But at the end of it, we decided we are going to send our kids back to school. So we sent our 5-year-old to preschool, private preschool that has extensive COVID measures in place, and we got our baby into a nanny share with a neighbor and a family who is also extremely cautious. And so I guess if it's one bit of advice I could give for people with kids under 5 who have more of a choice, is look at the schools around you, look at the options for neighbors or nanny shares, and try to get them out of the house, because I honestly couldn't have gone back to work full time with them home this time around.
Yes, yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think that's good advice for folks with kids under 5. I know I spent the beginning of my maternity leave caring for my older son and my newborn daughter, and that was not the way I had originally planned for it. And we were lucky enough that my son's daycare opened up and we were able to send him back to school after weighing those risks, because it's a lot. It's a lot at any age. I had my fill of poopy diapers at that point, so there's only so much we could do. And Maria, you did briefly mention the paternity leave policy. That is something that I did miss out on, so I was thrilled that you were able to take advantage of it. And how did you feel in order to take advantage of that policy? Did you feel less pressure on your leave? Did you have a positive experience with that component of it, at least that the policy was in place and you didn't have to burn through your saved up leave?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it was such a timely benefit. Our son was born October 13th, and we were on pins and needles until October 1st, which is when anyone would officially qualify for the program. That was the start date. Your child had to be born on October 1st or later. So we just made that cutoff, and I would say, time to recharge right now is really critical. And I now have leave to do that because I didn't have to use it for maternity leave. So it's been immensely helpful and couldn't have come at a better time.
And Cheree, earlier you mentioned, your role as a senior executive in the Corps. And, there aren't too many women in leadership roles within the Corps. And I know that puts an added pressure on the women leaders already. And then as we entered into this pandemic, I am sure that it added even more pressure. So can you talk about your experience as a leader within USACE and then the additional pressures or experiences that you've had this past year?
Sure. So when I first became an SES, there was far fewer women SESs and 15s than there are even just 4 years later, which is where I find myself now. Almost every meeting I would go into, I would say before this last year, I would be the only woman. There would be no question. And in fact, there would be maybe 2 or 3 other non-white men also in the meeting. So it was I wouldn't say it was lonely, because fortunately I had 2 great mentors right in the beginning to sort of welcome me, Mark Mazzani and David Ponganis, Pongo, both of who since retired, who sort of made me part of their little cabal for the West Coast SESs and really helped me make a difference right away and not feel so isolated, because there were not many of them are gone now, SESs who weren't particularly thrilled that I was there, and it could have been just me versus me as a woman, but that's the way it was. But thanks to people like Mark and Pongo reminding me that I was chosen and I'm here for a reason, and so I learned to speak loud and fast and to avoid being interrupted, because otherwise those things would happen. As a woman, you're much more likely to be talked over. But now that there are a lot more women, I would say it happens a lot more. It happens a lot less in leadership. Having Dr. Altendorf, Karen Baker was there when I got here, having Ms. Stacey Brown. The more women, I think, it's not that we work as a team on everything. Our roles are very different, but we do watch out for each other, which is really wonderful, and I'm grateful for the support to include General Colleton and Major General Holland as well in that support. So what has changed, I would think, recently, the result, I think, of General Spellman's introduction and leadership on this issue is that the SES women are looking at how can we work together to promote, more women in the workforce, not waiting for headquarters direction or DOD guidance or Army guidance, but what can we do where we are? And I think that has led to a lot of really good things blooming in the MSCs and at some of the districts. And because we're more proactive at not just the initial recruiting, but also the mentoring, because if you look at all the statistics, women and men start out about equal in the workforce, and the higher up the pipeline you get, the fewer women that you get at the leadership level. And there's lots of reasons for that, but it is then upon those of us who are at the higher rungs of leadership to make sure we're mentoring and encouraging those who are at the middle, who may be not getting encouragement from others, to help them and see what they're facing ahead, help them make decisions, to make sure that if they want to continue up the ladder, that they have the support to do so. So I think that's actually been an improvement in the pandemic. We've been able to work together a little bit better. And I don't know if I would not say that's necessarily a result of the pandemic, or maybe a result of all of us deciding we want to be more proactive together.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you, Cheree. And thrilled that you all are taking the initiative to really promote women in the workforce and not waiting for headquarters or other guidance to come out. I do think that having a balance of grassroots effort versus top down is really important. So Marcia, as a leader at headquarters, we wanted to hear your take on this, on the pressures that you faced, as well as the thought about promoting more women in the workforce, given your headquarters experience.
Okay, thank you for that question. I came to headquarters these days in 2014 and shortly went out later on maternity leave and came back. And it's been a drastic change. At the headquarters level, senior level, GS-15, you don't see a lot of women. You just don't. just trying to embrace and nurture is what I've always been focused on. I'm the chairwoman for the Women's Professional Network here at headquarters. It's a chartered youth-based organization, and we put on events. Miss Stacy Brown, which Cheree may have mentioned her, she's one of my co-chairs, and it was actually created by Miss Baker before she left and to go to NAD. And so I've kind of carried the torch. We don't have that many events because of COVID, but we have had WebEx check-ins, on different topics. And it's a way for us to bond, and it's, purple. So it's every color under the rainbow, and we just talk about the things that we're talking about right now, the struggles with COVID, with balancing your family, with trying to stay on top of your work, but then also bringing to attention, like we had one meeting where we had the female SESs. So my former boss, Ms. Brenda Johnson-Turner, was on the panel. Ms. Baker was on the panel, and two other women who were out of SAD. And it was just a way for women who are aspiring, to get to that next level, to say, like, let me pick your brain. What did you do? How did you get here? What are your challenges? This same thing, work-life balance, and just not being afraid to put yourself out there. And you're just as qualified. You're just as good. And how did you get here? And it's just that moment when we had that meeting, so many women walked away inspired. And that was a great thing to see.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good supportive group that you have up at headquarters, and we appreciate all of you sharing your experiences and trying to help, make the workplace better for all of us. As if the pandemic wasn't enough for us all to deal with this year, we had other difficulties this past year, including civil unrest across the nation and even at our nation's capital. I know that these major news events impacted my family, especially having young kids. They were concerned, about how this was going to affect their lives and if they were safe. And so it brought along even more difficult conversations to have with very young children. So I want to ask you all, how did these major news events impact you and your families?
So, I have teenagers, so it's a little bit different in terms of their reaction. We talked a lot, I think, about the Black Lives Matter movement and what that means about how we treat people, how we make decisions. We live just south of San Francisco, California, which is a very diverse area. Where we particularly live, I would say, is diverse in terms of Caucasian, Asian, and Hispanic. Not as many African Americans, but it was really heartening to see that many, went to the different rallies that we had here. And talking with my boys, it's I have to say, a bit of a struggle. They're 13 and 17. I keep saying that. They don't want to hear it from their mom, and they don't want to hear it from their dad. The Capitol insurrection was horrifying to me, and my older son was thrilled because his AP history teacher canceled class so they could all watch it. That's just not the response you want your child to have, but it's unfortunately the real response. But in terms of the civil unrest, we did have some really good talks about how, I would say there's the American ideal, everyone can by their bootstraps pull them up, but that not everybody's bootstraps are the same, or where you're standing is not the same as everybody else. And so we need to consider that when we're making all kinds of decisions. The playing field isn't level, and how do we grapple with that? So it was a good discussion, a couple of good discussions, but it's, I would like to say that it changed their lives, and they're, the most open-thinking boys ever. I hope they are. I hope our discussions helped, but time will tell with them. They're old enough to make their own decisions, and they have a wide group of friends, but they have a lot of life left to live, and I'm hoping the space that we set for them will encourage them to be more of an ally and lifting others up and not just thinking of themselves, which is pretty much what they do at this age.
And I can jump in as well on this. It's been a tough year on many fronts, but the Black Lives Matter movement really, really has made me want to do something. And I did not have this thought before this movement. And I think that's been one of the benefits of this movement, is it has made a lot of people really stand up and think about what they can do. And I thought about it a lot. What can I do from where I sit? I mean, it is a hard question, and it has really made me want to do more to address the inequalities as a core employee. You know, I thought about our agency a lot this year, and we work for an agency that has disproportionately impacted minority communities. We do, especially Native Americans, and we have a really tough history with that. And I think right now, we really have an opportunity to look more closely at these impacts and see where we can improve. You know, we have this executive order on advancing racial equity, and it requires agencies to address inequities in our program. So I've been thinking about that and just wondering, you know, can we have an agency initiative to focus maybe on a few of the gravest injustices that we are responsible for that are still unresolved, you know, like the displacement of tribes along the Columbia River. I mean, this stuff is overdue to be addressed, and maybe in this year and what we're experiencing and going through, we need to put our collective energies and resources to actually get something done. I feel really driven to do something about this. And even the Center of Expertise I work at right now, I'm writing a white paper on ensuring participation equity, because, you know, we're moving into an era of increased virtual public participation for our projects. We've seen that work fairly well during COVID, but, you know, there are communities and stakeholders that have limited or no internet, and we need to make sure we're not leaving them out. So I'm trying to look at that as well. And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement has really caused a lot of people to think about this, and I do think we sit in a unique spot in the agency that we work for where we can make a difference.
Like many of you, sat at home over the last year and have seen so many different protests and movements, unarmed people being killed. And it's difficult to have that conversation with your kids to understand why they may be treated differently because of the color of their skin. And then I fast forward to insurrection here at the Capitol. I came into the office the next day. I don't know if you all have been to headquarters, but the Capitol is only 2 blocks away. I'm a former reservist, Army, and to be greeted with guns on the street was just sad, because the realization that sometimes African Americans and women are willing to risk their lives and, you know, dedicate their lives to their jobs and to their country for a country that may not necessarily love you back.
Well, thank you for sharing that experience, Marcia. I know that these issues have been hard to deal with on a variety of levels, but to be confronted with that must have been extremely difficult, especially when you're dealing with all the other pressures that we've talked about throughout today's episode. So appreciate you sharing that experience, and hope that as we move forward throughout this year and into the future, things improve. And so we talk about trying to improve situations going forward. You know, we wanted to hear from you all if your offices have taken steps to help folks who are struggling throughout this past year, both, I would say, related to the pandemic and related to the unrest and things that we just talked about. And, you know, really want to know also if there are additional measures that your offices could take that you think should be suggested going forward. You know, what can be improved upon in USACE's response to supporting its staff throughout this time.
Sure, thanks. So the Institute for Water Resources, IWR, has done a few things that definitely have helped. They, right at the beginning, they expanded the day's working hours. I think they go from 5 to 11 now, so they gave us some more flexibility around, you know, the child care issues to fit in our workload. They've upped the frequency of town halls, which have been nice sort of touch points with with staff if you have questions, and they do, they always start with the COVID situation. So, they get, I think, from the medical office, the chief medical officer at headquarters gives us, that update. So those have been helpful. And just on the last town hall, they shared with us a policy that we now are able to access admin leave for 3 hours of exercise a week, which I think maybe is an Army policy, I'm not sure, but you're now able to use 3 hours of admin leave to do that, which is super helpful. As we know, exercise really kind of helps, at least for me, calm me down and refocus. Oh, and then we actually, just on the previous topic, we had a really helpful webinar on the history of racial injustice in the U.S. that was great to bring this conversation into the workplace more. So I think just building on what they've already done, I think letting us know about policies like the exercise or other policies that can help us during this time is super useful. Having webinars that give space to talk about the tumultuous events of this year. People are looking to talk about this, and you don't have those hallway conversations, those water cooler conversations, as you say, and trying to give a space for that. I read in the McKinsey report that women, and Black women especially, are uncomfortable sharing their thoughts about current events and racial inequality. And so, building on this webinar we had, I wonder about, creating safe spaces for these conversations at work, conversations like we're having today, conversations about current events. And even just thinking about this podcast, and listening to what Marcia and Cheree have shared, I wonder about some kind of mom support group in my office. We are so isolated, and when we get on calls, we just talk about work. So we're not connecting with at least I'm not connecting with my colleagues on a personal level like I used to. And it's just caused me to wonder, what would moms in my office think about we have moms groups in the neighborhood, and those are super helpful. And it was just something that occurred to me that maybe that would be helpful as we try and get through this.
Yeah, I think that would be great, Maria. I think that's a great suggestion. Cheree or Marcia, do you have anything to add, and what steps your office has taken to support your working parents?
As a supervisor, and I have a staff of roughly 10 people, different ages, but most of their kids are grown. That's a challenge in itself because they don't necessarily understand the struggles of, when you have younger kids. I've always been flexible in my approach. I call our little group the Cool Kids Club, and so I check in with them weekly just on a personal level, not about work, not about, did you respond to this email or did you send this document, just how are you doing? And I find it's helpful because some of them are older to the point where they may be, at home alone. So just that engaging just outside of work and just saying, how are you doing? You see that people are really happy to hear from you, that it's not about a work email, just to say hi.
This is Cheree, I would like to echo what Marcia said. I think while the MSC as a whole has not had any policies come out, other than, of course, the extreme telework flexibility, supervisors have been working very hard to check in with their people, be flexible about when people are working, understanding, maybe evenings are going to be a little bit easier for folks. But also, I think establishing, along the lines of what Marcia said, not just meetings about work, but hosting a happy hour, or we've hosted a baby shower. We had a picnic in June. It was a virtual picnic that was quite fun for what it could be. It wasn't as fun as a real picnic, but it was still fun, and we got some families involved. And I know I think other supervisors have been more pointed, not just having meetings with the people I directly support or supervise, but also making sure that I'm going to just participating, listening, supporting meetings of where I'm not even making a decision, but just, hey, I haven't seen you guys in a while. I don't get to walk by your cubes anymore. How's it going? Here's some things you might want to know about. And that I try to do that a little bit more regularly than I would have had we all been in the office I can't make someone walk by Paul's desk and make fun of the fact that he's a supporter of the Dodgers baseball team when he lives in San Francisco. But I can, if I drop in on a meeting, then I can do that. But in terms of official policies, no. I mean, I live in Silicon Valley, and the flexibilities that you see in the private sector do not exist here. I have to say the former Secretary of the Department of Interior during the pandemic gave every person, and I'm probably not getting this policy right, but I think if you had you were a documented caregiver, whether to a child or an elder, I think you got every Friday or every other Friday off. This is not things that the DoD took advantage of, but I think we tried to make the most of the flexibility that we did have. And I applaud the supervisors within the South Pacific Division for what they've done.
Yes, thank you, Marcia and Cheree, for just reaching out and providing that human interaction with folks. And I know I tend to remind myself that I could be one of the only people that actually talks to that person for that particular day. And so I want to always try to make sure that I'm listening and offering support if they're needed. So thank you for that. We are nearing the end of our time together. And before we part ways, we talked about various changes that have occurred through the pandemic. And I think we all know that we're not going to go back to pre-pandemic normal. It's going to be a new normal. And so, what are some long-term changes that you would like to see continue in the future? And then, do you have any advice or suggestions going forward?
Sure. So I know the agency is revisiting telework and remote duty location policies. I think there's some guidance expected from headquarters soon on this, and I know at more local levels these have been revisited. So I think, the more flexible we can make these policies, the better. I think COVID has actually allowed us to see that a lot more flexibility can still work, that telework can be quite effective. So if people can just get their kids out of the house and back to school, I think that we'd be great. That's a big if, and we'll see how the next months unfold. Yeah, I think otherwise, for me, I just try to be grateful for what I do have. I think someone mentioned that earlier in the call. People likely listening to this podcast probably have a job that's fairly stable, and just, as much as venting helps me sometimes, I also try to balance that with being grateful for what I do have, given what so many people have lost right now and don't have. So I think gratitude is, at the end of the day, also a really helpful way to try and remain positive.
I would just say, for me, telework is effective, and I think work-life balance is key. Being within, the federal government and having a steady, job, working with the military has always taught me that they would like to see butts in seats. But I think that COVID has shown that we can be just as effective, if not more productive, if we're at home. Here at headquarters, we took up 2 floors in the building. We've already consolidated down to 1 floor because for the foreseeable future, I don't see people being willing to come into the office every day. And so I think that flexibility is key. It's going to be a key for recruiting, and it'll be a key for keeping people within the workforce. And not just speaking just for women, but for everyone, that telework can be effective. Just hopefully we get to a sense of normalcy when everyone feels safe.
And I think for me, as a senior leader, telework was definitely frowned upon. I rarely did it, maybe once a month in coincidence with something else that needed to occur. I've heard things that it's still not going to be very welcome going forward at certain levels for senior people, and we really want to work against that and change that you can be effective. I mean, frankly, I have no desire to 100% telework whatsoever, but a more regular telework schedule could actually be very beneficial to myself and others, particularly women, because I would say the responsibilities of home and house and kids don't go away once we're back to whatever the new normal is. So I'm hopeful. I think we have more than proved, all workers for USACE, that we can deliver the mission in the most awful of circumstances. There is no question. So to question going forward that we could no longer have such flexible telework, to me is ridiculous. We have proved ourselves. We need to make sense of it. We need to make sure that it works for the position, and that's really a supervisor's job. But I think we need to do two things going forward, that one of which we had done before and the other which we hadn't. We need to continue to hold everyone accountable for program delivery, absolutely. But I think we also need to hold supervisors accountable for providing maximum flexibility for their workforce to deliver the mission. We've never done that before. We've let supervisors require everyone to be here, and we don't think that's probably necessary anymore. But the job needs to get done, and if the job requires that you do come into the office at times, come into the office at times. So I think we need to work on those twin goals, and I know there are people in leadership who are interested in that, and I'm working both at my MSc as the champion for our workplace transformation team and as part of Karen Payne's team for workplace transformation. I'm working on those twin goals because I think we have achieved those, again, in the worst of circumstances, and we should build upon that going forward.
Thank you, Cheree, Marcia, and Maria, for joining us today for this edition of Inside the Castle. We appreciate you and your insights. To your listeners, we want to hear from you. What topics are important to you, and what people are you interested in learning from? Till next time, be safe, be innovative, and be revolutionary.
To provide your feedback, email us at cw.infrastructure.team@usace.army.mil. Stay tuned for additional Inside the Castle podcasts as we explore life inside the Corps and revolutionize civil works together.